Hi, everyone. I'm Molly. I'm a registered dietitian. I've been doing private practice for about 5, 6 years now. And I have two kids. I have a 3-year-old and an 8-month-old. So I'm kind of in the thick of it with the sugars and snacks and all of that. And, trying to manage that. And I can tell you what I did wrong and what I wish I did differently. But we are here to just discuss sugar, what to watch out for. And I will let Dr. Nicole Avena introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Avena. I'm a neuroscientist, but I have a background in nutrition, and I am a professor at Mount Sinai Medical School, where our lab studies what happens in your brain when you eat too much sugar. And I'm also the author of the book, What to Feed Your Baby and Toddler. And like Molly, I too am in the thick of it with everybody else. I have two girls. I have a 13-year-old and a 6-year-old. And so, navigating this whole world of helping them to make good choices about what kinds of foods to eat and to really learn about how it's so important for their health to make these good choices and to avoid added sugar is something that I can relate to both on the professional level and certainly on the personal level as well. So I'm really excited to be chatting with Molly about this tonight.
Yeah, and with your background, I am very excited to chat with you. I'm sure I will learn a ton too. And I guess, should we start by just talking from your point of view so parents know without scaring them, like how much, I guess, under 2, we don't want any added sugar. After 2, of course, we don't want any added sugar either, but that's probably not as realistic. So
Right.
from your point of view, like how much and where is it coming from? How much sugar should you say is okay for kids, and where is it found in their diets?
Yeah, so I think it's such a great question, and it's so hard to answer because there's so many parts to it. So first of all, when we talk about sugar, I think we need to kind of tease apart sugar that you're going to be getting from eating, an apple versus sugar that you're getting from having, cookies and candies and cakes. And so I tend to break these into two very different categories because it's really important that we expose our kids to a variety of different fruits. And so I like to see most of the time kids getting the majority of their sugar from fruits. And we're really trying to just minimize the added sugar. So that's the sugar that you're going to find in, lots of these different treats that are out there, even breakfast items and things that we just know are not really good for our kids' health. And so I think that it's really important to kind of focus in on not necessarily thinking the mindset of, oh, we can't have any sugar at all, but really kind of focusing in on where are the better sources of sugar. And those are going to be places like fruits that have naturally occurring amounts of sugar that are also going to be having other nutrients and fiber and other things in them that are going to help your child to stay healthy.
Yeah, and I think even with added sugar, just to add to that, now, especially with kids packaging and kids snack foods, I found that, now a lot of people are using coconut sugar and honey and agave, which they are better than refined sugar, but they're still added sugar. So I think that's something that kind of gets moms and these marketing companies are taking advantage of, that's saying they're healthier, which they are, but it's still added sugar and it's not the same as sugar from fruit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something that, you're right. We need to be mindful about, different marketing practices and different things that are going on. There is a lot that happens out there in terms of, trying to make things look a little more healthier than they actually are. And I think that that's really happening these days in the sweetener market. And so my advice to parents, and I try to just do this with my own kids and our own family, is it's not really about, what type of sugar it is, or if it's, coconut sugar or agave or whatever it might be, but really just working on reducing the added sugar regardless of the source, because the whole point is we want to try to unsweeten our diet a bit. And I think that's one of the challenges that we face with our kids these days, is that so much of their diet is just loaded with sugar and sweets. And so in order for us to kind of wean them off of expecting that all the time, it's really in our best interest to kind of just really minimize the sweetness wherever we can.
And, it said like you want at max for kids 6 teaspoons of added sugar a day, which of course you want to be below that, but that's kind of the max. And just so you have an idea of what that means, those little packages of kids fruit snacks, like the gummy fruit snacks, that's 3 to 4 teaspoons of added sugar. So that right there is, you're getting near the top of what you want to be giving your kids. So that's just like a testament to say how easy it is to go above what is recommended.
Yeah, it's so easy. And I think even, for me, that's one of the challenges when I go in the grocery store, looking at the labels on different food products and having to do that math in your head and figure out, well, how many teaspoons of sugar is actually in this product? And so many products that are marketed towards kids that, on the surface look like they'd be healthy, like yogurts and things like that, often contain a ton of added sugar. And you can end up having your kid have almost the entire day's allotment of added sugar before they even left the breakfast table if you didn't be careful about it. So it is important that parents do become mindful of, the labels and really try to better understand them so that you can make better choices about which items to purchase when you're shopping, because there's a lot of options out there and some of them just aren't as great as others.
And what I read something that was scary, because it said 70% of packaged foods have added sugar and 80% of kids' food have kids' packaged foods have added sugar. So that just means like you really have to be a label detective and read those labels.
Yeah, and we're really up against this uphill battle because the food industry, they're clever, and even the real estate in the grocery store, so the placement of the different food items on the shelves, all of that is bought and sold. And so it's not a coincidence that, the sugary cereals that are geared towards kids are about waist height for you, because that's the eye level of your 5 or 6-year-old. And so, it is something that we have to kind of remind ourselves that the food industry is often targeting our kids and, positioning these products in a way that's going to appeal to them. And not only by the packaging, but also even just simply by the location in the store. So I always tell people, if you want to opt for the healthier products, reach up or reach down, because the stuff that's right in the middle is usually stuff that has tons of added sugar in it.
And not only are we up against marketing, but we're up against biology, because, we know that kids' taste buds, they are geared towards sweet flavors, because breast milk is sweet, because with evolution, it was to help save them from poisonous foods and bitter foods. So now we not only have to like steer clear of marketing, but also biology. And that's kind of by, avoiding those super sugary breakfasts, which is just going to leave them craving more and more and more. And even from the start, just helping to really introduce different flavors and natural sweetness rather than the added sugar, which is so much sweeter than a natural fruit sugar. So it's like, it is a lot of work to make sure our kids are not going to be totally addicted to sugar.
Yeah. And I think it's something you bring a really good point up. We often don't realize that children live in different sensory worlds than we do as adults when it comes to taste. And so there's been lots of studies that have been done on this that look at the threshold for what is the most desirable amount of sweetness. And kids will actually find something that's much, much sweeter than adults would like to be the optimal level, to be that bliss point. And it's interesting because as adults, our sweet taste receptors change over time. And so what we tend to perceive as being sweet enough is actually not really considered all that sweet to kids. So they're biologically designed to want to have sweeter things for the reasons you just mentioned. And also just because of the way that their brains and their bodies are developed. And so that's why, sometimes I try to remind myself of that when my daughter's asking for, why she can't have another cookie or, why she can't have more sweet. We have to keep in mind that to them, it might not taste all as sweet as we think it does.
Right. So on that note, I think we should spend time talking about like how you talk to your own kids, because you have older kids than me. So I can talk from like the 3-year-old negotiations I'm having at home. But how did you talk to your kids about when you introduce sugar, about setting limits with sugar and how to make sure that we're not giving so much value to sugary foods? When I was first doing it, I didn't want to say, if you finish your vegetables, you can have sugar, because then I was allowing sugar to be this treat and giving it so much value. So I know I've bribed plenty of times, but from your perspective, I guess, what's worked, what hasn't worked as far as your kids and get them on the same page?
Yeah, I always love to hear other parents, what's worked and what hasn't worked, because it's so funny to hear, the things that people try that work and the things that people try that don't, and the overlap that we all sometimes find in that. So for me, my older daughter is 13 now. And I remember when she was younger, we kind of had this idea of, okay, we're going to really limit the exposure to sweets until she gets into preschool and, gets exposed to them just passively through grandparents or going to parties and things like that. And it became one of those things where, we were mindful of it, but we weren't super restrictive where, she couldn't have any sweets, because I don't necessarily think that tactic is going to bode well, because when people do that, sometimes it can backfire. And then, kids like really just kind of go overboard and they never learn how to police themselves. And so that was really our goal, was to kind of teach her the limits, teach her what's an acceptable amount of a treat, teach her, when to say no. And one of the things that I found to be a challenge was when she started going to elementary school. And so when she started kindergarten, she'd come home from school and after dinner, she'd ask if she could have dessert. And then, couple conversations later, we learned that she had a big giant cupcake at school because it was Susie's birthday. And, so I think it became a process of kind of, having these different conversations to try to teach the kids that, if you have a cupcake at lunch because it's someone's birthday, then that's your dessert for the day. You don't get to have a second dessert when you get home just because you're with mom and dad and it's, after dinner. Yeah. And so that's really been our strategy, is to try to teach the children to impose their own limits, because at the end of the day, you're not always going to be able to be there, right? You're going to, be at work, or you're going to be home or doing something else, or going to be under someone else's care. And we really need them to be in control of, understanding what's an appropriate amount, what's healthy, and, when they should maybe say no if they've had too much. So that's been the strategy that we've been using. What about you, Molly? What has worked for you?
It's funny because growing up, I have two brothers, and it's funny that I ended up in nutrition because my house was always kind of like the fun junk food house. Like we had, the Dunkaroos and the sugary cereals and everything. And I remember my friends whose parents were very restrictive would come over and literally eat until they were like sick. They would just want to get it all in. So I 100% agree that being completely restrictive is going to backfire at some point. Maybe not, but likely your kids will either go elsewhere or they'll lie to you, or, create some weird relationship with the food. So I don't think being extremely restrictive is the answer. And I think letting kids learn their own hunger and satiety cues. And if that means like letting them see what happens when they eat 3 cupcakes one day and seeing how sick they feel, then maybe that's what they need to learn themselves. But I think, what I've tried now with my 3-year-old is, of course, there's days when she has birthday parties or special things and it's more than this. But I think, what we've tried is she knows she can get one cookie or 2 small cookies, whatever that amount is, we've decided, every day after, and usually it's after dinner. I was talking in one of my mom groups and she was saying that it can be helpful to just say, you can have this whenever you want, right? So it's there for you. This is the amount you can have, and you can have it every day and you decide when. And it's funny because I think probably at first they would eat it right first thing in the morning before breakfast, yeah. Right? But then they'd eventually learn that, like, maybe it's better to wait till the end of the day. And some moms were saying, no, I want it to be after dinner when they've eaten enough of their growing food. So I kind of call it growing food for healthy foods that are going to help them feel strong and brain work and hair grow and eyes works, and, trying to teach them about the benefits of healthy foods and not making it so much about healthy and unhealthy. That's why I've sort of labeled it as growing foods that are going to make you big and strong. So I think, she's getting to the point where she kind of understands, like I ate my growing foods, like I'm going to have my treat or my dessert now. So I'm trying not to give too much, value to the sugary, but still knowing, I'm not going to avoid it. It's already been introduced. It's not going to be one of these households where she never has anything. I try to make good choices. I like to bake. So my treats, I try to make them healthier by using, I have a bunch of recipes on my blog. I'm sure you do. I have a bunch of fun baking recipes that are healthier. So if you can at least control what those sweeter treats are, that's great. But I think it's all about learning moderation, having 2 small cookies or 1 cookie, and that's exciting and great for them, and not becoming one of these things where they're overeating or want more and more and more.
Yeah, I totally agree. I love that approach. And I think you're so right that it is all about moderation. But I also think it's important to note that moderation is going to look different for different families, and there's going to be different levels of that. And I even think, like you said, moderation is going to look different depending on, what day it is. If it's a special day, or, especially now with the holidays, like, maybe we're letting the kids have a little bit of extra treats just because that stuff happens to be around. Yeah. So I think it's important to teach them flexibility and to know that you don't have to have these rigid standards around what you eat. But I think that at the end of the day, it's always good to come back to that, you know, this is about your health and what you eat. It's a long game in the sense that, you know, you're not going to get super sick and get diabetes or get cardiovascular disease because you're eating a whole bunch of cookies right now. But if you live a life like that, when you get to be, you know, mommy and daddy's age, you might find that it's going to catch up with you and then you're going to have health problems, and we don't want you to have that. And so I think that it's hard for kids, especially little kids, to grasp that. And I think that it's really just up to parents to kind of stick with it, because I'll say, having, you know, a teenager now, which I can't believe I have a teenager, it does click at some point, and they start to see that, you know, if I make poor choices with what I eat, then I'm not able to run around the soccer field as well as I would have, you know, if I didn't eat like that. And they start to see, you know, it can affect their skin. It can affect, you know, just how well they feel like they can focus when they're taking tests and things like that. And so when kids get older, I think they start to remember all of these other things we were telling them when they were little about their diet, and it does eventually click. So I tell people, you know, stick with it, because even though you might feel like it's falling on deaf ears when the kids are real little, at some point they're going to process it and it's going to make a big difference.
Yeah, and what I found hurts, like, helps, is that instead of just being like, no, 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 you can't have this, you can't have this, you can't have this, is it's really frustrating a lot of times, and I feel like a broken record. But I keep saying over and over, like, it's my job to make sure that you grow big and strong, and that you feel great and have a lot of energy, and you can do all the fun things that you want to do. And that's why I want you to eat these healthy growing foods. And then when we're done with that, if there's room for a treat, we'll have that. So I try to, like, explain it rather than just like, you can't, you can't, you can't, because I think, you know, it does, even if it's still hard, it helps. And it at least makes it.
No, and it's true. And I think, you know, again, I totally relate to the whole it being frustrating, and you do feel like a broken record, but explaining to kids then makes them feel like they're part of the situation. Whereas if they're just being told, no, you can't have that, they start to think, well, why not? Like, you know, why am I being told just no? And so I think explaining to them and taking the time to do that, as much of a struggle as it can be sometimes, especially when you just want them to eat what you have prepared for them, it's worth it, because it helps them to start to see what's happening and see why it's so important for their health.
Yeah, and I think that's so true. And then the other point I wanted to say is that you are modeling behavior all day, every day. And, you know, I think it's hard, but it's very important for kids to see you eat a variety of foods. So, you know, I have, you know, in my practice, I have clients that I have to, like, tell them to eat a piece of pizza with your kids. Sometimes you can't only be having the salads, right? So it's like both sides. You have to model the ability, you know, if you want your kids to have a good relationship with food, you have to model balance, and that you don't put too much emphasis on any food, right? You can't freak out if you feel like you've eaten too much, or talk about unhealthy foods, or talk about your weight or your diet or whatever you're doing. Your kids are soaking right up. So I think being able to model that you can eat whatever you want in the portions. If you're having pizza, having a piece of pizza and salad, you know what I mean? Like, showing, so it's not too much emphasis on good or bad foods, and showing that, like, there's room for every food, including treats. It's just about how much, and, you know, which foods are going to work for you and provide benefits, versus just being fun foods.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, that whole, there's no good or bad foods, I like that. And I also think that, you know, one way to explain it to kids is that, you know, there aren't good foods and bad foods, but there are better foods. Yeah. And you want to try to focus on making the better choice every time you have a meal. And so, yeah, I mean, if it means, you know, we're having pasta night and we're going to have a giant bowl of spaghetti and meatballs, and we have salad on the table, we're also going to take some salad, because that's the better choice to make than to just focusing on having spaghetti and meatballs. And so just kind of teaching them these little things that they can do to just make their diet a little bit better. And that's going to make it thereby a little bit healthier. And over time, these little things, they do add up. They really can make a big difference. And I think that, you know, it's really just kind of working to teach them these little tricks to make those things happen, so that we don't find them, you know, as adults that really just are finding themselves in a bad place. I've worked with many adults who are struggling with food addiction and sugar addiction. And a lot of it is rooted in their childhood, because they just kind of grew up in a situation where their parents kind of just let them eat whatever they wanted, and there wasn't as much of a focus on healthy eating as, I think modern day parents tend to have. And so I do think that, we do want to teach our kids as much as we can about the importance of a healthy diet, because if we let it go when they're little, it's going to be just so much harder for them when they get older to change those behaviors and to change their ways of thinking and eating.
Yeah. And I just want to sign it, like, I have a very picky eater. So I think it's funny because I went into having kids of like, I would lead the seminars and this is what to do with the picky eater and how to get them to eat more vegetables. And of course I was handed the kid that, wants chicken nuggets, mac and cheese, and that's pretty much it. So I think, it's hard. And I also have to remind myself every day, because I watch her eat this, and of course I'm giving her the healthier options of these very few amount of foods that she wants. But I have to remind myself there's phases, right? Like, she's going to get past this phase.
Absolutely.
Don't freak out or beat yourself up if you feel like your kid is not having kale and broccoli and spinach. I am like, okay, I'm gonna make her a really healthy smoothie in the morning, which thank God she drinks. I put spinach in her pancakes, which thank God she likes. And then, you know what, like, if she wants to have chicken nuggets and mac and cheese, and I can give her the bonza like chickpea mac and cheese, great. But I don't beat myself up that, I look at the other kids eating, whatever their parents are eating. And of course I'm like, oh, I wish she would do that, but she doesn't. So
yeah, it's, it's so funny that you say that, because my little one's also a picky eater. And she wasn't, though, when she was, your little one's age, when she was like 3 or 4, she was eating everything. It was so easy. And now, she's kind of at this phase where she'll develop these, food preferences where she'll like say, oh, I absolutely love this. And so then I'll be like, okay, great. And I'll go buy a whole bunch of that. And then suddenly she doesn't like it anymore. So she's, doing one of those things where she's kind of changing things and falling in and out of love with different foods. And it is a phase. And I can tell, my older one now, she kind of went through all of those different phases. And I think that's just a natural part of the appetitive process. I think that's healthy for kids to do. I think, a lot of times parents get upset and worry when their kids are picky eaters, but it's actually kind of a good sign, because it shows that your child is being able to make discerning decisions about what kinds of foods they want to eat. They're able to recognize, like, oh, this texture is different, this flavor is different, I do or do not like that. And they're able to kind of have these sophisticated, discussions in their mind, or maybe with you, about what the foods they're eating are. And I think that it can be an avenue to kind of talk about it with your kids to get a better understanding of, well, okay, if you don't, like kale, why is that? Is it the color? Is it the texture? Maybe we could make kale chips and then they're going to taste a little bit different. Maybe we could, add some seasoning and they're going to taste different. And so talking to your picky eater about why they're so picky and what it is about the foods, I think can be an eye opener sometimes, because you can maybe sometimes make modifications to those foods to get them to like them.
Totally. And the one thing I will say is, like, I've noticed, at least, it seems like the less I care, the easier it is. So when I want her to try something and I'm like all over her about trying it, it is a fit, like, and it's not worth it. So it's almost like when I put the food down and I sort of walk away and I'm casually talking to her, doing my own thing, it's like maybe I have a better chance of her trying something new. And I try to give sometimes something new, and then 2 things that I know she'll eat. And believe me, it started with her throwing the food off the table. And then I would have to just say, oh, I guess you're not eating lunch today. And it was very hard. But, I think slowly she's learned, like, okay, it's going to just be there. If I don't eat it, I don't eat it. And I try not to make too much of a big deal about it, because it's a control thing, right? At the 3-year-old age, it's like and I'm sure it's worse. It's kind of, I'm controlling what I eat, and they're right. They do get to control that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's an attention thing too. I think, if they can get a rise out of mom, and like, it just, even though it's negative attention, it's still attention. And so I think that, if kids see that, you're going to fuss over them and really, try to coax them into eating something, that is an incentive for them to not want to eat it, right? Because you're giving them extra attention than you would have if, they were to just put it on their plate and eat it themselves. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I often recommend that parents really appraise and encourage eating when kids are doing it on their own, healthy eating, and really applaud that and make a big deal about it, especially for the little ones. If they're trying something that's brand new, that's a celebration. We should be cheering for them. And that's so great that they're trying something new, and make a big deal about it. Give them the attention for doing something that's a positive eating move that you would if it was a negative eating move, and try to make it so that that's the reward.
So true. So from me, I just would love to learn from that. Now that I have your time. So from the neuroscience point of view, like any studies that you want to talk about, just as far as like sugar and the brain or development or anything that's like you've read that you're like, wow, that's crazy or
Yeah, so it's interesting. So I actually got into this field back when I was in graduate school doing my PhD at Princeton. For my dissertation, I started to wonder for my project, why are so many people struggling with obesity? It seems like there must be something happening in our food environment that's causing people to be compelled to overeat, because everybody knows that these foods are unhealthy, but yet people feel like they're compelled to eat them.
Yeah.
And so for my dissertation, I actually developed a model to study whether or not sugar could be addictive and the impact that sugar could have on the brain. So we've published tons of studies on this. And basically what we found, and what other labs have found as well, is that when you eat sugar, it releases dopamine, which is a neurochemical in your brain. And it's similar to what happens when someone uses a drug of abuse, like nicotine or morphine or cocaine. And so when we eat sugar, it's actually activating these brain reward pathways that's like what would happen if you were using drugs. And so this is part of the reason why it's so hard for people who are eating a lot of sugar to get off of it. And it's also part of the reason why our kids love it so much, because it's pleasurable, it's activating these brain systems. And I think that knowing that is so important, because it really does illustrate the fact that, over time, you can get addicted to sugar and it can have negative health consequences. And I think that's why it's so important, especially from an early age, to be able to recognize that, and to be able to recognize even among kids, if they are overeating sugar, what's going to be doing to their brain, and how is that going to have an impact on not only, their food choices and maybe their health and their body weight status, but even their ability to focus in school, even their ability to concentrate. All of these things are being shown to be altered by eating too much sugar. So we're just really learning about the long-term effects of eating too much sugar. But from what we're seeing from the research studies, there's a lot of negative things that can happen, especially when kids start off overeating it and continue down that path into adulthood.
So crazy. And I guess just, the way to prevent it, or even if you have a kid that you feel like is, you're like, oh man, they're already eating too much. And
too late. Oh no.
Never too late. And I would say, you're not going to make a kid quit sugar cold turkey, especially when they're young. So that's really that emphasis of what we're talking about, is like crowding it out, where you're just emphasizing everything else and making less room for that. So I think it's, just like making it almost a challenge if they're old enough, like, how many colors can you get on your plate? How many, and talking so much about like almost like superhero powers. Like, did you know that carrots make your eyes stronger? Do you know that, talking about antioxidants, explaining it to them, because you know what, maybe they won't care, but maybe they think it's cool. And maybe that's another reason to sort of help them, they want to be faster and stronger and play sports better and be able to do all the fun things that they like to do better. So I think even if you feel like you're talking to deaf ears, like just talk about it rather than just acting, right? Like, I think it's better to explain over.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a good idea to kind of try to figure out how you can incorporate whatever your kid is into at that moment into educating them about nutrition. And so like you said about, superheroes and their senses, and how food can impact your senses and make your vision better, your hearing better. For me, my little one right now, she's really into science experiments, and that's all she wants, is to do science experiments and look up different ways to do science. And so one of the things that I've been teaching her about is that basically cooking is a form of science, because you're following a recipe and a set of instructions, and then you have an outcome. And if you don't do the experiment right when you're cooking, sometimes the product's not going to come out right in the end. And so, one of the things that we've been having a lot of fun doing is doing these little, cooking experiments where, maybe instead of, baking cookies with sugar, we're crushing up some dates and chopping them up and using that as the way to sweeten the cookies instead, and see what's the difference. And if we compare the two, can we tell the difference? So there's really lots of different ways that you can kind of capitalize on what your kid's into and try to just turn that into some way that you can use to educate them about nutrition. And that's a really great way to get them excited about it and interested in it too.
Yeah, that's great. And involving them in the kitchen in any way, there's so many opportunities with cooking to teach about texture and colors and counting and measuring. So I think cooking with kids, it has so many benefits. And then when they're cooking and they feel involved in the cooking, or you even let them pick what you're going to make, they're more excited to eat it. They feel empowered. They feel part of the process. So if you like to cook, then that's just, a great way to involve your kids. Yes, it will be messier and longer process. So maybe not when you're in a rush, but if you have time, it's a great thing to do.
Yeah, I agree. I think, it's kind of one of these, I like to cook. I'm a recipe developer and I've developed all the recipes for my books. And, for me, I love to do it. I've always loved it, but I do know that there's been phases in my life where I've been like super busy, where I'm like, oh, I don't really have time to cook, or I certainly don't have time to teach like a little kid how to cook. And so I really think that it's something that when you have the time, it's worth it to do, because it's just so rewarding. It's such a great bonding experience. And, you're teaching your kids a skill set that, they might not get from anybody else. I was talking about this with someone the other day. I'm old enough that when I was in middle school, they had home economics classes where we like learned how to cook and measure things. And, now my daughter's in middle school and she's like, what the heck is home economics? Like, they don't teach us that. So if you don't teach your kids to cook, they're not going to learn in school. So it is a skill set that parents really need to pick up.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such an important skill. You're so right. Like, I know so many people that have no idea how to cook. And sometimes even on my Instagram, I'll like do a salad and everyone's like, can you send me the recipe? I'm like, you just put this together. Like, in my mind, I'm like, you really need the recipe? But yes, people do. And not everyone has like that skill set. So I think if you can teach them young, or even try to get into it even later in life, I think it's important.
Yeah, I agree. And, what you were saying about, making a salad and people wanting the recipe, I think a lot of people get afraid of cooking because they think they have to follow the recipe to the T or it's not going to come out right. And yeah, if you're making like a souffle, maybe that's the case. But if you're putting together a salad, I think there's a lot more creativity involved with cooking than people often realize. And so it's kind of about learning to put different ingredients together in a way that's going to complement the other ingredients and make everything taste yummy and be healthy. So it's not so much that people have to be afraid of the recipe or not know how to cook because they don't know what to do. It's kind of just about getting in there and just putting stuff together and seeing what happens. That's why I kind of like the whole experiment analogy, because that's essentially what it is.
Yeah, so true. And I guess I don't know how long we're supposed to go, but I guess the last thing, just from neuroscience and your background, I love talking about gut health. So anything that you want to just throw in about kids' microbiomes and their gut health, and even when they're young, like how the sugar is affecting it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the gut brain connection is something that we've learned just a ton about over the past, I'd say 5 to 7 years. And, it used to be the case that, scientists thought that the gut and the brain were basically separate entities and they didn't really connect or talk to each other. But now we know that there's so much communication between the gut and the brain, and really the two are driving forces behind each other. And so, this is particularly an issue when it comes to kids, because there's so many things that unfortunately can happen with kids that can really have a negative impact on their gut microbiome. So, hey, kids get sick. Sometimes they have to go on medications, and that can cause disruptions in the microbiome. But we can use nutrition to rectify that and to repopulate the microbiome in a healthy way. And so focusing on foods that contain probiotics, foods that like the vegetables and fruits that are going to contain nutrients that are going to be supporting our gut and supporting our microbiome, those are so important to incorporate into kids' diets. And about sugar, coming back to the topic, we know that sugar can have a negative impact on the gut microbiome. And that's why we see so many people talking about how when they eat so much added sugar, it can actually serve as an inflammatory marker. And it can cause some of these changes in our bodies that are similar, to what happens when people have developed autoimmune diseases. And so we really do need to think about the fact that sugar can have a negative impact, not only on our brain health, but also on the gut health. And those two go hand in hand. So it is something that we need to think about when we talk about what we're feeding our kids.
Absolutely. right, I think we should wrap up there. I could talk about this all day, but I think we
Me too.
time. But it was great chatting with you, and thank you, ByHeart, for having us. And I hope that people listen to this and send in any additional questions. I'd love to continue the dialogue, and it was great to chat with you.
Yes, absolutely. Same here, Molly.
All right, bye. Oh, and also, lastly, you can find me at Molly's Best on Instagram. And how about you?
Oh, yes. And you can find me at Dr. Nicole Avena on Instagram. And also, if you're interested in learning more about our research and just work on sugar addiction, you can check out my website, which is drnicoleavena.com.
Awesome. All right, thank you.